Hello. A very good afternoon to everyone who's joining us in person in Oslo, and good morning or good evening if you're joining us online. I am Neeti Biani. I work with the APNIC Foundation, and I am going to be hosting this session today, which is titled Addressing Digital Funding Gaps in the Developing World. Uh, Considering we do have the scope for a roundtable setup here, I'd request if anyone wants to join us on stage so that we can have a more candid, informal conversation. I'd like you to be as big a part of it as we are. So if anyone wants to please come on stage and join us here, please feel free. All right. Let me just start out by introducing the APNIC Foundation, a little bit about what we do. We are an internet and digital development organization. We serve across 56 economies in the Asia-Pacific region. We invest in and channel resources towards building technical and human capabilities. We help drive digital innovation, and we enable digital transformation across the region, working with a host of different stakeholders and partners. I am privileged to be hosting this conversation on addressing gaps in funding for digital development at the IGF 2025 in Oslo today, this afternoon. As we all know, we've seen quite a rapid decline in official development assistance, ODA, philanthropic giving, corporate giving, all of which have together exacerbated gaps in funding available for internet and digital development or ICT for development in the global majority, especially. In this context, I hope that, as various stakeholders present in the room today, we can discuss, have a rethink of funding models, partnerships, and collective impact to ensure that we are impacting sustainable progress and outcomes across the various regions in the developing world. I am joined today by a remarkable panel. I'll maybe start from my absolute left. I have Shabnaz Rashid Dia. She is Executive Director at Tech Global Institute, working at the intersection of government, businesses, as well as civil society. To my left is Remy Friedman, who is Senior Advisor, Human Security and Business at the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. I am joined online by Martin Bottoman, who is a director on the board of directors at ICANN. On my right, I am joined by Franz von Weizsäcker. Did I completely murder your last name? Who is responsible for economic development and digital transformation at GIZ. And to my absolute right is Raj Singh, CEO of the APNIC Foundation. And I'm Neeti, your moderator today. So I maybe want to start out by asking Dia. Dia, how do you understand digital development efforts across the global majority, across the developing regions so far? Maybe, in the last couple of decades, how do we, for the establishing of a common understanding of digital development, of internet development, how do we understand that collectively?
Thanks, Niti, and hi, everybody. Very privileged and excited to be on this panel. I think just diving right into it, in the last, I would say, if you take the last 20 years, perhaps, starting with the original commitments of the WSIS process and how there was a real sort of global understanding around bringing the unconnected online, supporting digital transformation, particularly an important and addressing some of the issues in digital divides, gender, sort of creating a more equitable world that is digitally transformative. We've seen a tremendous amount of progress. We've seen more countries coming online, communities coming online. There has been a huge push to create jobs, create sort of development outcomes, tackle some of the most pressing issues in society using technology. But at the same time, I think, we're still, 20 years later, we're still at a point where 32% of the world's population still remains unconnected. And, that continues to be a challenge. And and the global north-south disparity is quite still quite prevalent. In the global north, we have 93% who are people who are online. In the global south, we only have 27% of the people who are online. So that disparity is very much present. And we know, from our work in communities that the people who are most disproportionately affected are women, girls, marginalized populations, minority groups, etc., who just are not able to come online, whether that's for device affordability, whether that's because of lack of the actual infrastructure, being able to reach certain parts of the world. And sort of a number of challenges, which is beyond just the infrastructure, but also many structural challenges. And so I think there's still a lot of need for that push to happen. But also in the last 10 years, I would say, there's also been trends of not just people not having the resources to come online, but also when people are online, a tendency to also disconnect them. So we talk a lot about the unconnected population, but there is also a tendency of disconnecting populations through forced shutdowns or network throttling, and that's also a huge concern. And so just based on Access Now's report, last year alone, there was 296 shutdowns in 54 countries, right? So that's an extraordinary number. So even when there is this push in the broader development agenda to get more people online, there's also this counter, I would say, sort of trend where there's, people are getting disconnected. And in that sort of a situation, I think there's, we're at a pivotal moment where more and more people, especially the global south, they feel the need to kind of catch up to the global technology race. They're seeing, huge amounts of some countries moving very fast, some countries kind of, slowing down. And so I think at this point, and especially in line with the discussions we're going to have today, the funding for the sort of the funding reductions we see around the world, the ODA assistance falling, is a really concerning trend because in many ways that's going to really set back years of progress that has been made. And now more than ever, we need that to happen because that disparity between the global north and south is whatever progress we've made, that's probably going to widen a lot more. And it's going to put an entire part of the world, and perhaps the majority part of the world, in a position where they're completely left out of any kind of technological progress and any kind of opportunities to see the benefits of digital in their countries. And so I think this broad connection between resource availability, the country's aspirations for development and broader economic progress is very much at risk today, and happy to speak more about it to the panel.
Thanks, Dia. I think just bouncing off of what we've heard so far, let me turn to Raj. Raj, if you can speak on behalf of the APAC region, which is one of the largest developing regions in the world with, the bulk of the unconnected, underserved, remote, dispersed populations, right? How do you understand, Dia's reference to the changes that we've seen in the funding landscape quite recently?
So thanks, Nidhi. So you're quite right to say.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nidhi. So you're quite right to say that the Asia Pacific is very diverse. It's the world's largest region, and just before this session, I was speaking in the parliamentary session, and what I said there was, and I'll just repeat that here, the fact that the Asia Pacific, as an example, we've got some of the most advanced economies in the world, and we've got some of the most least developed economies in the world, and that in itself becomes a challenge. Now, overlaid on top of that is that, you see parts of the world leaping ahead in various types of new technologies, be it, the government itself either invests in it or they've got very mature industries or the private sector who are taking the lead in moving forward. Then you have all these other economies that are nowhere near that level of development. And then, for example, you go to an event like the IGF or to various other multilateral meetings and other conferences around the world, and you hear all these stories, people say, no, we're doing this, we're doing that. AI does this, IoT or whatever the next iteration is going to be, it's going to change everything, and this is what you need to do. So suddenly you have here an economy which probably doesn't even have a fully fledged policymaking unit in their regulatory section that can actually develop policies and shape what things should look like, because most of the time they're working off a reactive basis, right? Something happens, they need to react to that. So it's what I call reactive policymaking, not proactive policymaking. So that just to sort of lay the foundation there of why I think this is a problem, right? Then you have the different levels of development that exists. And again, Asia Pacific is pretty much a poster child. South Asia, which is one of the 4 sub-regions in the Asia Pacific, half of that sub-region is still unconnected, okay, which is a very stark statistic, right? Now, there are various challenges on why that is the case, but the fact still remains half that sub-region is unconnected. And if someone's heard me speak before, you would know that I always bring up one thing, and that's that we seem to be creating new digital divides constantly. We're not stopping. And I've been in this sector, this industry for pretty much all my career, so going on close to 30 years now. We were talking about stuff 30, 20 years ago in a slightly different guise. It was ICT4D. We're still talking about the same issues. Some of those issues have not been solved. I mean, last year we did a couple of panels at the IGF and we brought up these issues again. Given it's only been 6 odd months since the last IGF, but the fact is, nothing has changed all that much. Now, on top of all that, what we've seen in the front end of this year, there's been changes made globally in how things are being funded, ODA, for example, overseas development assistance. So that's one. The pot of money has shrunk. But if you look at the private sector, even their own pots of money are shrinking because there's margin pressure, right? There was a time when a lot of the private sector would go and fund things out of CSR or other reasons. What we are seeing right now, that's shrinking very, very rapidly. Right? And then governments themselves, they have their own priorities. I mean, do they invest in primary healthcare or do they invest in a funky new internet infrastructure? Right? So that's sometimes a hard decision to make. So I'm just going to let that hang there because, what I'm keen to see is, and France was with me on the panel last year, we had some interesting discussions on where we should get to, and which means, don't duplicate stuff, work together, collaborate, complement. Sort of keen to understand, in 6 months, have we gone any step forward or not? I don't know. So.
Thanks, Raj. We'll definitely come to that in the course of this conversation. I think at this point, let me turn to Martin. Martin, you're online. Hopefully you can hear me, even though I can't see you at the moment. But, you're here representing ICANN. I see you. Hi, Martin. You're here representing ICANN, wearing a few more hats, I'm very sure. ICANN's had a particularly focused approach to supporting initiatives and developments across the world, which is that you want to further your vision of a single, open, globally interoperable internet. I just want to ask you, bouncing off of what we've heard from Raj and, the particular challenges that, either being unconnected or not having meaningful connectivity or meaningful access. How do you interpret those in terms of ICANN's mission, the role that ICANN plays, as well as how you envision ICANN's impact across the landscape, across the sector?
Thanks, Niti, for that question. It's indeed, as you say, it's one world, one internet. And ICANN is there to serve the world. Russia is representing the APAC region. As we know today, most of the internet users live in the APAC region, whereas 25 years ago, most of them lived in North America. So you see a shift in the world. This also means that there's a shift in the world in terms of experience, where the markets are. And we're very much aware that we are there to support the world. And that means that in countries where advancement of internet is less, there's more to win, and we actually actively reach out to support that. An example is the continent of Africa. The continent of Africa is where percentage-wise, there's most growth happening over the years to come. In terms of people also getting connected, that is where we see many of the next billion, as well as in other parts of the world, including APEC. But in Africa, we're, for instance, actively engaged in a capacity building initiative, which is called the Coalition for Digital Africa, which is really to support all kinds of transformative projects that aim at enhancing Africa's internet infrastructure, cybersecurity, digital inclusivity, and the governance. So initiatives we have there is engaging with about 41 African governments, countries, but also with, for instance, the African University collaboration group. And things we've been doing there is, on one hand, together with Internet Society, for instance, setting up new connection points for the internet, installing new root server instances from the ICANN managed route, the L route referred to. That resolves now most of the traffic within the region, and to expand also the top level domain performance monitoring in Africa. All this to help Africa to also step up and grab the opportunities. Next to that, we're also supporting, for instance, as you know, ICANN is a multi-stakeholder organization in which different groups have their place. And also for governments, we do capacity development. We help them to get on board of the gag, become aware of lawmaking practices, and with people from over 19 countries on the technical functioning of the internet. Now, next to that, of course, this is just a regional example, and we have regional outreach throughout the world because we are very much aware that we are there to serve the world. Now, with that, a very clear example of that would be the next round of top-level domains, where there will be an opening for new initiatives to have a top-level domain that serves specifically also regions around the world, for instance, in their own character sets, own languages. Languages are important, they represent culture, but also not everybody in the world is able or should be expected to communicate in English. So it's good that we also support that richness, and we actively do, of languages and character sets. Also in our new round. And also being aware that, particularly in regions that aren't that advanced yet, extra support is necessary. We foresee that the applicant support program that has been put in place for those who are less aware at the moment, to help them to get up to speed with appropriate applications and good underlying good business plans. So with that, we truly believe one world, one internet, and ICANN is standing ready to support that actively.
Thanks, Martin. I think, Franz, if I can come to you, we've heard from Martin that, their support starts with squarely serving the mission of a single, open, interoperable internet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like GIZ's had a slightly different approach, where you support bettering and furthering socioeconomic progress and outcomes across the service regions you work in. But you've, since 2018, mainstreamed digital solutions as part of the projects that you do support, wherein you're trying to make sure that every project has a digital solution, a digital infrastructure component that then can be mainstreamed or replicated or scaled. What's your experience been like working on very real world issues, if I may call them that, but with, squarely mainstreamed digital solutions.
Thank you so much. Maybe let me get one thing straight. It shouldn't come across as if I was not in favor of free and open and internet for everybody. And so that definitely is part of our agenda. And the general trends in development funding, you've been describing it initially. The official development assistance tendencies, looking at US aid and so on, are going down. At the same time, some philanthropic funding is coming with the Gates Foundation, trying to compensate some of those declines. And just today, we got the draft budget of the German government. We have about a 10% decline in the German development funding budget of the BMZ ministry. Which is not as disruptive as in some other contexts. So indeed, what you mentioned is digital transformation is indeed a mainstreaming topic across our entire portfolio of achieving all the sustainable development goals or all the goals of the African 2063 agenda or various national development agendas. And just like, I mean, there are some mainstreaming topics that development actors are working on. We have gender mainstreaming, human rights mainstream, and digital mainstreaming. And to be honest, the digital mainstreaming is possibly the most successful one of those, knowing that no line ministry, no initiative, no health initiative, education initiative, and throughout all the sectors, the internet became a key enabler to be achieving these sustainable development goals and a factor for economic growth and for trade and for all the other goals that you have there. At the same time, some of the goals are conflicting. So if you look at the climate goals, of course, we have a huge energy consumption and corresponding carbon emissions resulting from AI, from data centers, from digital infrastructures. But then if you compare how much carbon emissions per economic activity you have in the digital sector, that is still much less than you have in more traditional industries, in mining, in manufacturing, and all these other economic activities. So still, you could say the bang for your buck, or the GDP per carbon emission is still quite good in the digital economy, in comparison. And yeah, we do try to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in a context where, our funding governments from Germany, from Europe, there are some political shifts we have to deal with. And if you look at the European Union, the major initiative is called the Global Gateway. And that is the attempt to leverage also private capital, capital of European investors in the achievement of development goals in infrastructure and in for energy, for digital data centers, IXPs. So that is part of what we are doing, is trying to leverage these private capital for the achievement of the development goals, knowing that we cannot entirely rely on public ODA funding all the time. So that is maybe the big trend going forward. Of course, at the same time, any private capital depends on the regulatory and the investment environment to be ready for that. And I cannot say that this is the case in all of the countries that we work with, where any European investors might be very hesitant to come in and invest in some countries when the general investment environment doesn't seem to be ready. So that is part of the risk of this tendency, is that we are losing out, especially on some of the security-wise, like those countries where the security situation or the general investment environment is not good. So that is indeed a big open question of how we best deal with that. For the Asian region, largely, a very large part of it is very ready for private investment, also international FDI. However, not all of the places, and especially in Africa, many countries, private investors would be would be concerned to be putting their money in. So it's about de-risking from using development banks mechanisms, de-risking these private investments, and then of course using the ODA where it is needed, where there's no alternative with this, for example, Global Gateway Investment Package.
Thanks, Franz. Having spoken of EU governments, we happen to have a representative on our panel. Remy, if I can turn to you, last but not the least at all. How do you see the role of the Swiss government, in the debate of digital development, building the digital rights narrative, contributing to this ongoing conversation of, more and more people having access, what kind of access, etc. While there is an infrastructure and, a connectivity and access question, there is also a quality of access question, right? So would you want to comment on that from the Swiss government's perspective?
Thank you, Niti, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting conversation. Hello, everyone. You put me just in an awkward position. Switzerland is not an EU member, so we'll speak for Switzerland, not for the EU. Anyway, I mean, Switzerland's international cooperation is guided by several principles, including promoting sustainable development, alleviating poverty, fostering peace and human rights. This is embedded in our international cooperation strategy, which is currently being renewed. And we really emphasize partnership, inclusiveness, result orientation in our cooperation efforts. Switzerland really strives to strengthen digital capacities of its partner countries, to improve the resilience of public services and civil society. But still, risks like the digital divide, which worsens inequalities, must be addressed. We are, as Switzerland, committed to establish strong digital governance frameworks aligned with international law in the different processes, ensuring fair and secure data use that protect individual dignity and safety. We are all here committed to advancing digital inclusion through open, rights-respecting and sustainable approaches, but we must recognize that the declining landscape of ODA and philanthropic capital poses a serious challenge, but also an urgent call for innovation and coordination also in the way we work. We are all convinced, and you just asked what are we striving for, is really that we all believe that meaningful internet access is not a luxury. It's really a foundational element of economic development, democratic participation and community resilience. Switzerland is a member of the Freedom Online Coalition, and in line with the donors' principles for human rights in the digital age that the coalition published in 2023, we support efforts that are transparent, locally grounded, and aligned with broader development goals. So, to this end, we see value in pooling resources, whether through catalytic funding, regional investment mechanism, or blended finance, in order to unlock scalable and context-sensitive solutions. But we need, really most importantly, ensure that these solutions are community-driven, inclusive, and capable of strengthening local digital ecosystems rather than creating dependency. So really this session is an opportunity to rethink how we work together, but not just how we fund. So let's see how we can construct a collective impact framework that builds on existing knowledge, centering on local actors, bringing together funders, implementers, and communities into a strategic alignment. So these are great segments, but it's a big question also. So let's see how we can do so to more effectively close the digital divide and ensure that communities are not left behind in this digital transformation. So question for all of us, I mean, how can we collectively address this growing gap and ensure that digital progress benefits everyone, not just a few? Thank you.
Thank you, Remy. I think you did my job there. That was going to be my next question, actually. So maybe before I just go back to some of the speakers, I wanted to open up the question to the audience and ask if you wanted to step in at this point and share any ideas, any reflections you had about, how do we bridge the gaps that we see in internet development, digital development at the moment. Remy brought in, a very key element of what the rest of the conversation is hopefully going to focus on. which is establishing a collective impact framework or ways of thinking where we are not competing, but we're sharing space and we're working with one another to hopefully make change, transformation, impact more sustainable, where we're not reinventing the wheel, excuse me, but we're replicating and scaling solutions where we can. The floor's open, the mic's all yours. If you want to jump in, share your ideas, share your thoughts.
Yes, hello. I work for a Norwegian company within law enforcement, and we currently sell to police in all across the world. What we see is it's difficult to sell to countries that are used to getting funding, even though they are, have support from the UN system. It is a lot of skepticism around how this can be done, and also this zero trust is also difficult to handle. So there are ways that this works in the current setup, and we are happy to offer a low-cost version of our tools to these regions, but it's difficult to find the way. So I think that is there are options of using current setups that we're using in every other country, but it's the zero trust and the lack of kind of solutions and ways to work around this that is difficult, I would say. So how to get in, how to be able to market or talk about the solution, because nobody wants to talk about who they're collaborating with if it's a private company. So there's a lot of skepticism around private companies. And I think this is a challenge that could have an easy solution if there was kind of a marketplace or one or another way of dealing with these challenges. So I don't know if anybody has any experience with this or can help.
Okay. Maybe we can, Martin, just before I come to you, maybe we can take one more reflection before we go back to the panel. I see someone already at the mic there. Yeah, please go ahead.
I don't have my headphones in, so I can't hear. Should I go for it? Thank you. My name is Molly. I'm with the Digital Health and Rights Project, and I've just released a research report looking at 7 ODA donors in Europe alongside the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust, looking at their investments into digital health. We found it really difficult to understand where investments were being made, who to talk to, different collaborating partners, and I'm really interested in this idea of collaboration and how we can work together as funders and other stakeholders. But transparency in those investment amounts, where they're being invested, and who we're working with is really important. So I wondered if the speakers had any comments on transparency and tracking and M&E for investment portfolios. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you. Martin, if I could go to you for the first reflection, if you had any responses before checking in with the rest of the panel.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think it's a very good question. What we see is there is a lot of offer of willingness to help, but how do you get that to help where it's most needed? And there is organizations who focus on that. I think the crucial element is that if you talk about digital inclusion, if you really want to serve the world with the internet, if you want the world to access the internet, you also need local capacity building. And without local understanding of what's needed and what can help, it's very difficult to land anything there successfully. So there is initiatives that really follow up on that, ranging from youth training programs to, for instance, the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise that has capacity building workshops in diverse regions where they bring in global knowledge together with local knowledge and local stakeholders to match what's needed today, how good practice looks like, how to implement it. From the global perspective, top of wave insights, and local needs, and then work together on, so how would an action plan, what actions could we draw from here that would really help us to leapfrog? Because many of the problems that we have in different regions are already solved somewhere in the world. And also, I think strategically we recognize that very much in the ICANN strategic plan. If it's about inclusion, you need to work with locals. You need to make sure that you reach out, and also Internet Society is very active in reaching out to the regions in that way. So without contact in the local community, how can you successfully land a global donation? Global Forum for Cyber Expertise is one of those things, but indeed it's to funnel it right. And transparency is limited. I realized that we had a conference in Ghana, in Accra, where somebody from the UN presented all the different funds that were available to stimulate something of the internet in the region. There were like 60 different ones. Impossible to see where they overlap, how they connect, etc. So we really need to work on that. And organizations like GFCE, but also Internet Society, Global Cyber Alliance, and other bodies, they can be very helpful in that, because they understand it's about linking the global to what's needed local.
Thanks, Martin. Do any of my other panelists have responses or views to what we've heard so far from the audience? Franz?
Yeah, I would like to respond to the intervention from the Norwegian company trying to sell a digital government solution worldwide. And I do see a major gap, and I do see there is an unhealthy tendency sometimes that some of the aid projects, they come basically saying like, okay, here's your solution, we bring it, and this is what we want to bring. And so it's a very much supply-oriented approach. And then not looking about how does the government procure these services in their local national legal system, and not looking about how this is going to be, how the operational cost of it is going to be covered, resulting in quite a few of solutions that come there, and then as soon as the project is over, they're gone. And that is a very unhealthy tendency, and therefore I believe the solution to the challenge you were describing is this is a governmental solution, so it needs to go through the national governmental procurement process. It needs to be a conscious decision by a competent procurement body saying like, is this something make or buy? Is this something, which part of the solution can we do and maintain locally through our ministerial staff? Which part of the solution do we need to buy? What's the mode of purchase? Is this software as a service? Do we purchase hardware? What is the mode? So, and that requires quite some more capacity in procurement than is present in many of our partner countries. So I definitely am a great advocate in favor of supporting, even though it's not a sexy topic, but supporting public procurement for digital solutions. That is really at the core of it, to achieving a lot of the development goals in the line ministries, in the security sector, as the example you mentioned.
Thank you.
Thanks, Franz. Dia, you wanted to respond as well?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll try to get a bit to the second question, but also maybe to tie into the first one. I think one of the challenges we also see in the broader digital transformation narrative is this, I think, not really by design, but over the years, sort of this unhealthy tension between digital development and human rights. And I think that itself is the reason why, you know, we don't see the kind of transparency, see the kind of ownership, or see the kind of, I would say, sort of clarity from many of, particularly in the global south, right? So I think that tension between, you know, where transformation comes at the cost of human rights, I think that narrative in many ways has actually been quite challenging to navigate, particularly in the digital kind of development space. But that has also at the same time created this other tension, which is, you know, what we call the norm shapers versus norm takers, right? So you have the global north who are shaping the norms. You know, you go to the IGF, look around you, there's just so few global south representatives, whether it's governments, whether it's civil society, whether it's the private sector. So there's also that, because of that tension, I think even more, there's this culture of imposition that has also come over the years, where some of the norm shapers are kind of also deciding what gets done in some of the global south countries. So to Francis' point, I think in some ways, ODA, while having a lot of meaningful transformation in many countries and meaningful impact in many parts of the world, has also kind of permeated that system of that tension between norm shapers and norm takers, where you're constantly having other countries defining in some ways how you should be thinking about development, how you should be thinking about your economy, and that continues to be a challenge. And I think part of trying to tackle that, which goes a bit into Remy's points, how do we work collectively together, I think is really kind of recognizing that digital transformation and human rights actually can work hand in hand. And when people in the norm receiving parts of the world are able to start defining the conditions in which they're going to take something or reject something, they have the rights to decide, make those choices. I think then we see a little bit more of that negotiation, a little bit more of that empowerment and that ownership happening.
Thanks, Dia. That's a great perspective, and one that we should try and unpack more, depending on if we have the time. I know that we have a question online. My colleague Omar is with us here as online moderator. Omar, do you want to come in with the question you have?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nidhi. So we have an insight. One of the participants, Morten, says that in our work at the UNU eGov with the governments and stakeholders globally, we often observe the following in relation to the internet auctions in digital government investment. Including those with donor contributions. First, licensing auctions often end up with a focus on profit optimization. This often leads to slower rollout of the infrastructure by telcos once license is issued. Subpar infrastructure is remote in remote or less profitable areas or increase relative cost to end user, while government naturally want to profit maximize it often become counterproductive to digital inclusion, affordable access. And this dilemma is seen in both developed and emerging economies. Second point he mentions is that many government ICT investments are not focusing on post-project benefit realization, cost benefit, productivity gains are generally not monitored or measured. This often leads to envisioned resource relocation is not okay. So this often leads to envisioned resource relocation is not happening in practice, including to reinvest new service in new solutions. So this was Martin. I have a question from Robert. Hold on, let me. He has got two questions. The first one is, I would like to know what the panelists have to say about very low digital knowledge in Global South. Investing in digital infrastructure is fine, but need to go hand in hand with global scaling. The second question he asks is that, okay, thank you, moderator, for pointing out the access in quality of access. Internet down here in Africa is still very slow, inexpensive. I would like to know what the panelists have to say. Thank you.
Thank you,
Back to you,
Omar.
Nidhi.
Thank you, Omar. And thank you to the audience who's joining us online and for your wonderful thoughts and useful question. I think for both of the questions that we've heard, let me first maybe turn to Raj. We've at the APNIC Foundation had quite significant experience with skilling across various different groups. I know that the APNIC Foundation also has quite a bit of work that we're doing on meaningful access, quality of access, bringing about affordability of connectivity. Would you want to step in here?
So yes, just a couple of things though. One, there was a question about submarine cables. Or there was a reference to submarine cables, right, in one of the comments. I have a comment on that. There's a lot of submarine cables being deployed all across the world. The problem is, it's the cables that are being deployed. There's no supporting ecosystem that's being set up at the same time. And in particular, I'm talking about regions such as the Pacific Islands, but as well as other parts of the world. Now, some of the reasons these submarine cables are suddenly being deployed is geopolitical in nature. I think we all recognize that. Some are, of course, very private sector driven. Irrespective of why it's happening, the fact is cables are being landed in economies. And when you ask the locals, what are you doing? Has it improved capacity? Yes, they've got a big fat internet pipe coming in, but there's no supporting ecosystem that can actually leverage the potential that that cable has. There is no supporting ecosystem around creating new industries that could leverage that. Yeah, you can try and retrofit old industries into using whatever capacity is there, but how about the new economy that we want to build using digital connectivity, right? So that's one issue and I've raised this multiple times, including with some of the governments who are actually funding these cables for various developing economies. There's no clear answer yet, so I'll also say that, on why that focus is not there yet. In terms of capacity building, and there was a comment about building skills is as necessary as building connectivity. I absolutely agree. At the APNIC Foundation, we've done something interesting this year. We've got a new strategic plan that we've developed, and what we've done is actually we're going to start speaking about capacity building in a very different way. It's no longer for us, and I would suggest for the rest of the world, it's not about building capacity anymore. It's about building capabilities. Because when you have capabilities, then you can do things, right? So, we've been using capacity building for probably 3 decades, if not more, in this sector. I think enough of that. Now we need to build capabilities. And when I talked about the submarine cable example, right, the capability does not exist. The connectivity capability exists, but not leveraging a capability out of that cable or what it could do to that economy. There was, and sorry if I just give me one more minute, the comment we had from my right, the person talked about M&E and transparency and so on. A quick comment on that. That's something I think we've also been looking very hard at the foundation in particular. So part of our remit is also grant making. So we've got, in fact, the Asia Pacific's longest running innovation fund. It's been running for 16 years now, and it's supported some great technologies and developments over the years. But one thing, since I took over the CEO role, what I've been looking at, I am no longer interested in the outputs that those projects create. I want to see outcomes. And that goes to something Remy said at the beginning when he was talking about the structural or the ecosystem that needs to be built. So that's structural in nature, right? And I think a lot of times we get so carried away with trying to do little things at the very granular level. We don't recognize that if we don't build a supporting ecosystem, if we don't make the structural changes, all that is just the one shot. I think Franz maybe said something about something dropping in and then you go and that's it, right? So I think that the need for that structural changes is very, very important, and more so to focus on outcomes. And that goes to things like M&E, which the person also mentioned, right? If I look at a lot of the metrics that are being used, the metrics are very output related. They're not outcome related. And that's something else that we're trying to focus on. So Martin, maybe there's some advice there for you and your grant making. Happy to have a chat with you and your team on how we can make that better. So thanks, Nidhi. Back to you.
Thanks, Raj. And thank you to everyone who intervened. Maybe we can come back for a final round of reflections once we've just covered a few more things with the panel. I think we've heard a lot of thoughts about, how to make sure that impact and transformation is more outcome oriented, how it should really help human beings, societies at large, better their social and economic outcomes, their lives, really. How there are still, significant structural challenges that we're experiencing, and finally, because this panel is about the global majority, it is about the developing regions. How do we then, therefore, determine our own development goals and our own development outcomes and transformation pathways? So maybe, Franz, if I can start by picking your brain, how does the GIZ understand and approach digital transformation? I'd like to also caveat that by saying that there is no commonly understood and accepted definition of digital transformation at the moment. So I'd just like to say that the way that we understand it at the APNIC Foundation is that digital transformation is a whole of society and whole of government approach to really using communication technologies, the internet, everything digital and tech, to better lives, to better quality of lives, and to further socioeconomic outcomes. Franz, over to you.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Niti, Martin also has his hand raised, so later on maybe you could give him a chance.
Thank you, Omar. Sorry, Martin, I'll come to you.
Yeah, so absolutely, it's digital transformation goes across all the sectors, and we don't talk anymore about this is a health project. I mean, we say it's a health project, but it has become a health in a digital age project, or education in a digital age project, and so on and so on. So that is for all the sectors. But then, of course, you have the underlying digital transformation enablers, which are across the sectors. So internet access, the most prominent one, and may I pick up the question from the online participant on why is internet so little available and so unaffordable in many parts of Africa. It's the regulatory environment for that. It's the investment environment for it. And it's also in some parts, it's just the GDP density, like in some rural parts of Africa, there is no economic incentive to build infrastructure. And that maybe leads me to another point. We are about to waste a huge global public good, which is the lower Earth orbit and the medium Earth orbit, by the scramble for space that is happening, driven by a couple of companies that compete in allocating their satellites in this low and medium Earth orbit, and in a way where it's not like an open ecosystem where anybody can engage with, but it falls into the hand of a few very powerful either private companies or governments to occupy that space, so that it will not be used. That this resource will not be put to the best possible use. And I have some slight hope. I don't know yet where it's leading to, but I have some slight hope that what either the European Union or some other players are trying to set up with the IRIS Square initiative, that this will result in a sort of more of an open ecosystem approach on satellite connectivity, which allows, as you know, these orbits automatically, and a satellite that flies over Europe also flies over Africa if it's the north-south orbit, or likewise east-west orbit. So you will have an investment that is fostered by the very, very high developed, like the developed economies, but automatically you're building an infrastructure that is available for the very low GDP per square kilometer parts of the world. And it will make it economically much more feasible to connect these areas as well. If we are able to establish a framework in which there is a good competition, and that's the second answer to the question, there's sometimes lack of competition in those telecommunications markets. If there's one incumbent and then there is competition from the sky, that also is a factor to lower the prices. So yeah, that's my answer to your question.
Thanks, Franz. Martin, is your comment or intervention to do with digital transformation?
I think so.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, basically, it in a way connects also to Francis' comment about, for instance, the low orbit networks. Accessibility is key if you want to participate in the digital transformation. And as the dear colleague asked online in his question, it's not only accessibility but also affordability of that for people with so good quality. And part of the answer is in what Franz gave. It's competing infrastructures. I mean, if you just have Starlink for low orbit networks, it'd be very difficult to have a competitive offer. If there's some kind of competition between networks, be it Starlink, be it 5G, 4G, 3G networks, or even making good use of LoRaWAN in areas where that would be best in connection with the C cables from Dutch. I think then we talk about enabling something. And let me take you back to 1996 when I worked for the European Commission, I admit. And I had the honor and pleasure of running European telework agenda. And I got to one of the outskirts of Europe. I mean, within Europe, it's not the world, but also in Europe, there was areas that were less connected. And this specific area was the Western Isles, which is in the very north of Scotland. And by that time, they just had one big line from to those islands for telecom. To get access, to get bits from also other telecom providers and make sure there was good quality, the local council took it upon him to define a strategy for how they would want to do this digital transformation over there, how they would commit to supporting and promoting a digital transformation by their own requirement of products of access, but also stimulation of their local community in what they call the telework commitment. That led to much higher connectivity. But that's why it's so important that it's understood locally what digital transformation can bring for you. Because if you don't create a pool from that location, what you will get is what the big companies want to push. And that may not always serve you well. So back to really the matter of making sure that local understanding arises of what's needed and then to get it. Last point on the point that was made by this gentleman on slow and expensive networks in Africa. This is also where governments can make a difference, and a very good example there is India. What one can see in India is that internet access and participation is set as a priority in the Digital India plan. And one of the key conditions, what helps a lot, is ensure that access to the internet for people is affordable. And government can play a role there, either by ensuring competition of infrastructures, or if there is too little competition, by imposing lower reasonable rates. I hope, is it digital development enough?
Thank you, Martin. I think on that note, I want to come to Remy. Remy, we've heard some interesting perspectives, from the panel itself, from, our participants online, as well as the audience we have here today, where we've talked about digital transformation, the key role, the very unique role that indeed only governments can play in trying to determine what national strategies can look like, what those development outcomes look like. How do we know that we've gotten to a place where we can claim that we've benefited, many, many of our citizens and our people? On the other hand, we've also heard some key questions about, meaningful digital transformation, where we're factoring in accessibility, affordability, where we're talking about cooperation, where we're talking about sharing infrastructure. I'd maybe like to glean your thoughts on these, and I'd like to ask you a follow-up question, which is, what is the role that you think government interventions can play here? vis-a-vis what is the role that the market itself and competition can play here?
Thank you. Big question. Thank you, Niti. Well, digital transformation is not only ensuring equitable access to the internet worldwide. This comes with a responsibility, because digital transformation is everything that comes with access. Even if we all have the same connectivity, the same speed, do we have the capacity to deal with the other side of the coin and be be responsible in using the internet? And their governments have the role of course, of protecting human rights, setting standards, the necessary safeguards, and that's why governments are coming together. For example, I was mentioning the Freedom Online Coalition and their principles. The workforce working in the tech industry must be a right-respecting workforce, but the rights of the workforce need to be respected as well. So it's a fourth industrial revolution, but it's a transition, as we speak of just transition when we talk about a fair, I would say, energy transition, climate action that needs to respect human rights. The same thing happens with the digital transformation, and the fact that it comes with a responsibility. States still have the obligation to protect human rights. Companies need to respect human rights. Citizens, individuals need to have access to effective remedy when the rights are not respected. And everything we're discussing here at the IGF and in other spaces about respecting human rights in the digital space, everything becomes relevant when we have equitable access. Do we have the capacity? And there, we heard about capacity building, and that's also an element. Development cooperation must come together with capacity building on cyber resilience, for example, how cyber development comes with cyber capability or capacity building as well. So that's why I was saying we need to join forces across different disciplines, use existing frameworks, but sometimes their governments have an important role to play. Well, needless to say that. But.
Dia, if I turn to you with a similar question of digital transformation, what role does the government have to play here? I know that some bit of your context is also informed by when governments cannot fulfill that role. I know this is a bit of a stretch, probably not what we're here to interrogate, but because the government has a very key role to play here, maybe a very short reflection from you on a scenario like that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think Remy actually articulated quite well. We're both part of the Female Online Coalition. We're the advisory network, and I think a lot of what we talk about is the role of governments not just to tackle the digital divide. And I think Raj very eloquently talked about, we see digital divides being created every day in different ways. It's not just being connected and unconnected, but it's also connected and disconnected. It is also, some having rights, some not having rights. It's about being norm shapers versus norm takers. So there's so many layers and layers of divides that we see across the board. So I think in the coalition we talk quite a bit about what role can governments play to ensure that transformation is meaningful, and when we say meaningful, that it actually takes into consideration some of the unique social and political context of where they're existing, that it isn't coming at the cost of an imposition and at the cost of people's rights. So I think the perspective that I will perhaps take here is, we've heard from governments, we've heard from APNIC, perhaps of the actual communities that we serve, for whom we're doing all of this. And I think from the community's perspective, it's oftentimes I guess people start, I guess, seeing that distance from digital, or seeing that, seeing themselves removed from transformation when they're unable to exercise their voices and they don't feel empowered by it. And I think that empowerment is quite critical to a meaningful transformation agenda, where it's not just about rights, but it's also about redress. It's about being able to shape it the way that makes sense for them. It is able to tackle some very real problems for them. And I think connectivity is just the first step, or access is just the first step to a much broader conversation around, how do we think about transformation in a way that actually serves the people it's intended for.
Thank you, Dia. I think we do have some time to go into one final round of reflections or thoughts or comments from our audience. Would anyone like to participate? The mic's all yours.
I'm always willing to reflect. I really have thought a lot, see a lot coming together here. Digital transformation is ongoing, and we want it to be for the world. We want it to be for all. But we can't stuff it down the throat of the world. We need to enable the world to come to the table, to participate, to make sure they know what they get, what they want, how they can benefit from all these things that the new technologies are offering, the internet is offering. So I'm really very much inspired by the many young people who have engaged in programs like the Youth Ambassadors Program, the AP Youth Program, and other programs, because this shows that new generations will be even making more of a difference than we've done. We've been building the internet in the old days from the outset. So start young with capacity building. Take your responsibility as stakeholder, whether you're a government or NGO or a company. Take your responsibility and empower people. Make sure that they know what to ask for, and help them to get it. Help to create the circumstances. I think there's no way back for digital transformation, but we could do it in a way to make sure it's fair, it's inclusive, and it serves the world as a whole.
Thanks, Martin. I think you've brought us to almost the close of the session on a very inspiring note. I think I'm just going to turn back to my panel for any final thoughts on everything we've heard today, everything we've discussed today. What would you leave the audience with finally, if I may start with Raj?
Thanks, Niti, and thanks to the panelists for joining us today. I think it's been we've covered a lot of ground. I'm not sure how well we answered the actual question that we had for today's panel, but so what I will say very quickly is that, we're back to that same situation where funding is shrinking, issues keep on popping up, digital divides keep on widening. There are multiple organizations doing lots of things, be they governmental and non-governmental, private sector, philanthropic organizations, family offices and whatnot. But each time I look at what everyone's doing, including my own organization, it's also very clear to me that there's actually, we talk about collaboration, but there's actually very little of it. Right? Everyone's got their specific objectives they have to do something, and they go out and try and do it. Yes, there's some discussions and some collaboration at some level perhaps, but there still is a lot of duplication out there, and I think that really is something we need to address, knowing that funding levels are shrinking. Because if we just keep on duplicating someone else's work, I don't think we're actually achieving much in the end. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Franz?
All right, let me try to leave us with a positive note. In times of shrinking funding, it's a time for reckoning as well, and it's a time for maybe reinventing the way how the international development community used to operate, and maybe it's a time to really build on the sovereignty of governments, the sovereignty to determine their own digital future, to get away from the traditional donor and receiver model, and to build on what really matters for the individual economies to emerge: good regulatory systems, good public procurement, good rule of law, a fair taxation system that does not rely entirely on taxing telecommunications, making internet very expensive, and that as a basis to encourage also investments, also from private sector, to become sovereign in many ways and less depending on international development. So ideally, I would wish that our role as GIZ at some point may not be needed anymore, at least not in that form, and we're shifting from the traditional development towards an international mode of cooperation. Thank you.
Yeah, we're all trying to work ourselves out of a job. Remy.
Well, thank you. Well, maybe pointing at the fact that digital exclusion is fundamentally a development issue, as it was already mentioned, and that we need to somehow break the silos and integrate mainstream digital inclusion within different streams, for example, within climate resilience, gender equity, education, health agendas, rather than treating this as really a separate infrastructure challenge. So this could be maybe a way to go really because it has to be mainstream. It's not a separate thing that is only related to infrastructure and access.
Thank you. Dia?
I guess I get the last word, but unless Martin wants to come in. One of the things I always take a lot of inspiration from is I come from the traditional development sector, right? So I've worked in digital, but digital for health, digital for agriculture, the old ICT 4D crowd. And whenever I feel a bit hopeless, I think a lot about the polio movement in the world. And it was an impossible problem to solve many, many years ago. It still had this it's not similar, but, infrastructure gaps, funding gaps, collaboration gaps. And I think the problem got really, truly solved when all the different actors began to come together and realize this is how we're going to solve polio. We're going to innovate around vaccines. We're going to go out to the most ruralist part of the world and solve this disease. And in many ways, the world has eradicated itself out of polio. There's a few more cases not coming up, but by and large, it has eradicated polio. So I think if we can solve something as dramatic and as drastic as that, I think there is a natural incentive within digital transformation, digital infrastructure, digital connectivity community to come together. And I hope this current moment that we're in, where funding is shrinking, like Rad says, it seems that we're back to square one. I hope this becomes a moment of reckoning to realize that we can really solve tough problems better when we come together. So my hope for the ODA community is that, this isn't just a cry for help or something, but also a real moment to see the value of coming together as a community.
Thank you. Martin, and just in the interest of time, I am going to wrap this up here, wearing my moderator's hat. I wanted to very quickly say thank you to all of our panelists who joined us today, especially Martin, who joins us virtually. Thank you for attending this session hosted by the APNIC Foundation, to everyone who's here in person and online as well. I just want to leave everyone on the note of saying I agree with a lot of sentiments we've heard today, that I think we are stronger together. I think we need to have very informed conversations about exactly how we determine our own transformation, how we collaborate between various stakeholder groups, and how we make sure that we're holding space for different voices to be heard as we determine our own development futures. Having said that, I think in the Asia Pacific, with a region that's as vast and diverse as it is, unlike any other region in the world, the APNIC Foundation has the unique privilege of working across 56 economies, serving the many communities that we do, hopefully, having some amount of impact over the course of our work, touching lives and, making sure that we're leaving communities a bit better than how we found them. We're very open to having more conversations with different stakeholders, different groups, different communities. You know where to find us. And once again, thank you for being part of this conversation. Hopefully we'll see you next year as well.